I'm not mistaken, we have a quorum now. So Representative McGuire, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. So I hope everyone has in front of them an amendment that at the top, this is not an official amendment. It says the word unimproved at the top, and it says 0647H plus edits, right? So remember when we came to the public hearing, we said we needed some changes, and I went to OLS and I said, here are the changes, but what came back wasn't particularly well written. So, I think they're quite stressed over there, quite frankly. In my committee, we have a 500-page House Bill too, and we've never had one more than 250 pages, right? So it's really crazy. So, so I think, so rather than go back to them for yet another thing, in case, because you're probably going to have changes also, I just wrote in my own changes and with the help of my co-sponsors. And so that's what you have in front of you. So this is not in any way an official from OLS, piece of work. This is something that we took theirs and made changes. Okay? All right. So, I'll just go through it. So nothing from the public hearing has changed in terms of the concept or the motivation or the, what we're trying to do or anything like that. It's just a matter of trying to get that written correctly on paper in a, formal, official way, right? So, so I'll go through the bill briefly, and Tony will be here to give you more details if necessary. So the first paragraph is, this is the existing paragraph in current law that defines who is in group one. So what's been removed from this paragraph is state employees, right? Because what the bill is doing, standard state employees, not group twos and not teachers and so on. Yes, Peter?
This is since you testified on the original hearing, or this is what is always done?
That was always there, right? But I rewrote this paragraph a little bit to make it clearer. Okay, okay. So,
It's still the same basic concept?
yes, nothing, right. It's all about trying to edit this so it says the right stuff, right? So, yeah. So, so what we did was, so this paragraph, if you look at the bill or the amendment I gave you last time, used to also define group three, that's our new group, right, in this paragraph. But we decided that doesn't make sense. This is the paragraph that defines group one. So we'll define group one. And then later in the group three section, we define group three over there, right? So anyways, so that's the main change.
Yeah, Dan, sorry, one question real quick.
Yes.
Even technically speaking, old hires, even if this goes through, would still be under group one for state
Yes,
workers,
and
correct?
I think that's implied the way this is written, but I think you should make that specific.
Yeah, I think it needs
So
to be a little
so
bit
I
more.
think you would, after permanent firemen, you might say, and state employees hired prior to July 1st, 2024, right? So I do think that's a change that ought to be in here. Okay. The second paragraph is the one that makes sure that these people, the group threes, count in the calculation of the unfunded liability, and their employers pay the unfunded liability payment. So that's what the second paragraph is. Okay, number two. And then from number three, this is the plan, right? This is the new group three stuff. And there's some definitions. Again, what's the plan and so on. So one thing we found out in the meantime that makes this clearer is that this is a straightforward 401A plan, okay? So there's no two plans or combination plans or whatever. This is a 401A, that's it. And both the employer and the employee contributions are required, right? So the employee is required to put in his 7%. The employer is required to put in whatever they're required to put in. We wrote this such that it's the same as group one. Whatever the employer is paying for group one, that's what goes into this, okay? So the money part, the money going into the plan, the same as group one. And so And so if you ever change what an employer is doing with Group 1, that would automatically change. You know, the way this is written, just whatever it is in Group 1, that's that's what it gets. So, okay. So, but the plan itself is just one plan. It's a 401A. Both employer and employee contributions go in it. It's managed according to the employee's preferences. That's it. So that's the simplification of 100A 59.
And then real quick,
Yeah.
because I haven't had a chance to look over this, vesting's immediate.
And it has immediate vesting.
Okay,
Yeah,
so that money is immediately accessible to the employee.
oh, well,
Well, within the bounds of a 401A.
yes, right.
Yeah, okay.
Because, you know, you can't take money. There's a
Yeah.
later paragraph here which says under
65.
what circumstances can you receive money, and it's not immediate, right?
Yeah, but
You know.
it's portable. They can
Yes,
take it
it's
with them.
portable.
Yeah.
It's theirs. Right. There's no vesting. Okay. Yeah,
Right.
termination. You know, it's things like death, right?
Sure.
Termination, disability, all those. Anyway, okay. The members. So here's where we define who's going in. State employees beginning service on or after July 1st, 2024. And probably we should say other than teachers, right? So well, now I look at this, right? Other than teachers, permanent firemen, and permanent policemen, right? Yeah. Right? And maybe it should be permanent state employees. I don't know. Because if there's part-time state employees, they don't count, right? So, yeah, so this probably has to be fixed a little bit too. See, here's the problem doing stuff at 5 o'clock at night or something. Okay, so you see what I mean. But anyways, this is the paragraph that defines who's in this plan, okay? Then we say who's in charge, and so you'll have an executive director, so somebody will be hired to do this, and they'll make rules that they need, okay, the commission. So, okay, so I think we need, oh yeah, we have it here. Yeah, so because this is so similar to our existing 457 plan, we decided to, the overall board that's sort of in charge, we decided to make it the same as the existing board who's in charge of the 457 plan. Now, that's a detail that you could decide, maybe we need a brand new board. I don't know. It's just, these are people that have been doing this for 35 years. They have a lot of experience. It's a very similar plan. They could put them out to bid at the same time for administration, you know, that stuff like that. So we just decided here, we decided to make that board, what we call the commission, that's that board, the one that already is there.
I'd
Okay.
like to say that board has the state treasurer, the commissioner of administrative services, and a number of employee members. It's a well-defined board that looks like it's got all the important people on it.
Yeah, and it seems to be doing a good job, et cetera. So yeah.
If I'm remembering correctly from the last public hearing when I was in the other room, did he mention that we wouldn't necessarily need 541 rulemaking if we stuck with that board?
No, I think you do, because, you know, there's going to be forms, there's going to be details about what does somebody do when they want to, you know, say they're retiring and leaving, and, you know, stuff like that. There's always details, right? So, yeah. Okay. And I assume,
Just a
yeah,
second.
go ahead, Peter.
So it's not just details, but rules are different than statutes. They have the force and effect of statutes. But the thing is, they're very detailed in how you do things. Statutes as a general rule doesn't do
Yeah.
that. So they're going to be rules.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think
yeah,
they're
no,
gonna-
I think what he was saying is those rules might fall under rules that are already there if we synced them up. But like I
Well,
said, I
they-
was kind of over there, so
They should probably be separate rules, but very similar to
sure.
the
Yeah.
existing rules.
Yeah, I bet if you looked up the rules that the 457 plan has, they would, be copied more or less. But obviously, there can be special changes, right? So,
Sure.
okay. So that's the administration. The commission, this is basically copied from the other plans. So they can pool the assets, they can hire somebody to administer the plan, give choices to the employees and all that sort of stuff. Okay. Now, member contributions, this just says 7%. It's the same as in Group 1. Group 1, it just in statute says 7%. So we just copied that here. It seems simpler than referring to that other section, but anyway. Limitations, this is kind of boilerplate stuff. It says if federal law says you can't put in more than X, then you can't put in more than X, right? So contributions by the employer. So notice we're referring to RSA 100A 16(2) Part C. So this is, that's the Group 1 calculation. It's called Group 1 normal contribution. It's currently about 2.5%, but it's something that the retirement system calculates. And so, I think it can change over time. And so that's why we made it, just whatever Group 1 is doing, that's what we're doing here. Okay. Individual investments. So we're just saying do it the same way that the 457 plan is. And so in the sense that they would contract with somebody, they would have their own choices, there'd be a limited list of funds and so on, right? The same way the other plan does. And vesting, they're 100% vested, so it just says that explicitly right there. And then withdrawal. So there's certain conditions under which, and I think these come from federal rules, generally speaking, but it's you can withdraw when you terminate, when you retire, when you're over 59 and a half and still employed, if you become disabled, die, you have some kind of financial hardship, or there's required distributions. So sometimes with a plan like this, once you reach age 70, you're required to start taking out like an IRA, that kind of thing, right? So even if you might still be working. So if we ever had judges in this plan and we passed that constitutional amendment and they're 74 years old or something, then there you go. Okay. And then there's a specific reference to a part of 401A9. This is probably, kind of belt and suspenders, but it says will comply with whatever required distributions the federal government has. This health insurance paragraph, that's copied from Group 1. It's a kind of a boilerplate thing. It says employees can participate in health insurance the same way they would under Group 1. And then the last paragraph is about this plan will have some startup expenses, right? We'll have to hire an administrator, the equivalent of Craig Downing, to run this plan prior to the date when anybody puts any money into it, right? So and also it's going to have a relatively, the first couple of years it won't have that much money in it. So what we have here is that the general fund will pay for this administrator and pay for the first few years of startup expenses until such time as the fund itself is big enough to pay its own expenses. Yes.
And would that front money be recouped by the state for funding it?
No.
Or it is a
It's
contribution?
an expense, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And just to give you a general picture, I was told that we hire roughly 1,000 people a year. Okay, we get 1,000 new hires a year under state employment. So roughly, let's suppose that their average salary is about $40,000. So this is putting into the plan roughly 10% of salary. So we're talking about roughly $4 million the first year would be going into this plan. And then the second year, you would have a new $4 million from the new people, plus you would have another 4 million or whatever from the first year people, right? So the second year of the plan, I would expect roughly $8 million added. So now there'd be about 12 under management, right? And then the third year, let's say another 10 or so, 10 or 12, because some people are going to be dropping out, right? Some people quit in their first year or their second year. So, after about 3 years, I'd expect there might be $20 million, and increasing over time. So, by comparison, the 35-year-old 457 plan, that has $500 million, right? So it's much, much bigger. This will take time to build up. And our retirement system, I think they're at maybe $10 billion or something like that. So it'll take a while to get to a stage where the plan can, its own expenses, it makes sense for the plan's own expenses to be paid for by the plan. Okay?
Any immediate questions from the subcommittee? And then you, Diane, go ahead. Go right ahead. Go ask.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would submit that changing this plan would have a chilling effect on new hires. What happens if the 1,000 new hires that you're looking at don't happen?
Okay, so what you're arguing, do you mean changing, you mean adopting the bill? Right, you don't mean changing the way this is written.
No, I'm saying changing the retirement system
I
entirely.
understand. Adding group 3. Yeah. So this is, so our argument during the public hearing is that this is more attractive to new employees rather than less, because especially in this group of employees, there's a lot of turnover. People start their job and after only 1 year, maybe I have some figures, I can get them to you, but the retirement system, their assumptions are after 1 year, 25% of these new hires will decide I want some other job, right? And then the next year, another 10 or 15%. And then the next year, you see what I mean? And it shrinks down. But the point is, a lot of these people don't last to the 10-year vesting. So this plan is 100% vested when they start. So it's more attractive to someone, in general, it's more attractive to someone who's not sure what they're doing, they're young people, et cetera, right? And people in general go to lots of different jobs in their lifetime. So I would argue that it's more attractive rather than less.
Yes, Representative McGuire.
Yeah, I'd like to also reply to that because of the immediate vesting, this means that the legislature can't screw with their retirement plan. It's out of our control. It's under their control. And that's something that, as we've noticed, is of concern to a lot of employees. And then, of course, it's their money. So that makes a big difference to a fair number of people. That it's their money, it can't be screwed with, it can't be changed, it can't be taken away.
So one thought that I've been having on it that maybe you can kind of elaborate on. Did we hear it all from the New Hampshire retirement system on we have a lot of turnover in this group, and typically we're still contributing employee-employer, right? The employee can take the money with them if they leave, but the employer money would stay in the fund and then would go towards the UAAL because it would be absorbed. So if we go with this system, how would that affect the actuarial rates? Do we have any idea of how much money that's going to, because now the employee is getting all of it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't asked Mr. Carlin that specifically, but I think it's relatively small. Yeah, go ahead. And I have to go, so I will turn it over.
Thank you, Representative McGuire. Appreciate you coming in.
Actually, I'll move over so people over there can see. As I recall, at the public hearing, Marty did say that for this bill, the effect would be minimal, and he wasn't concerned. If at some point we were to switch all the state employees over to this, it would eventually have some issues, that issue, and also, towards the end, as you're winding down the current plan, they're going to have to pay it, that the amount invested will shrink. They're going to have to pay it out sooner. They'll have to go with more conservative investments. The return might be less. So if some future legislature decides to make this much larger, it could be an issue. But Marty said it wasn't a concern. He was not taking a position on this bill, as I recall.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that that's one of the reasons that it's only state employees, because if you decide to be a fireman or a policeman, you're choosing to work for government and it's for your career, essentially. Some people may change their mind, but in general, you're saying if you're a policeman, you're going to work as a policeman for your entire career. If you're a state employee, you can get a job as a truck driver, an accountant, a janitor, anywhere, and they are not necessarily committing to a career in government employment, and so they want to be able to. And that's what the statistics show, that they don't stick around long enough to vest, let alone to retire.
Right.
Yeah. Representative Schuett.
Thank you. With reference to Representative Lakis's point, one of my major concerns is the retirees who are in the plan now and what's going to support their retirement going forward if there aren't new funds going into
Yeah. Go ahead.
enough
Yes.
new funds. And
The employees are continuing to contribute toward their normal retirement as they have been, and their employer will continue to the normal cost. And the only thing that might change by not having as many new members added as before might possibly be the unfunded liability. But the contribution to their personal retirement is, the employees are putting in a lot. The employer is putting in enough to cover that retirement. It's only the history that's so big.
Right, and they're still forced in this to pay the 10.79% to the UAAL. So that portion of it is still being taken care of. So it's still the old portion's still being taken care of, the old debt's being taken care of. They still have to pay that portion of it, but then they're funding their own retirement moving forward. They're not adding to the liability of the New Hampshire retirement system.
And the
people that are retired,
the plan is also supported by all the teachers, which is the biggest single group in the retirement system, all the police and fire who are still in the 100A system. So there is no way that this will cause the retirement system to consider itself closed. It's still open. It's still accepting new teachers, new policemen. It doesn't need to go into the death spiral of a closed plan.
And if I,
however,
And are you talking more from a cash flow perspective? Like
well,
money
like I
going
said,
in
the
right now to
support
pay
for
right now?
Retirees that are not, the retirees are not putting into the system anymore.
if I could
But
make
they
a
need
comment,
funding to support their retirement for ad infinitum. I will say one other thing that occurred to me, and we know from experience, we've seen this before, when major changes happen to the retirement system, there is an onslaught of current employees who retire so that they are grandfathered. And with them goes literally hundreds of years of institutional memory out the doors.
This doesn't affect any current employee.
right, if,
They are still in the 100A retirement plan. They are not required to put any more in. They may choose to leave and go to this system, but I could imagine that would only be appropriate for somebody who has,
A year or two.
who is a short time. I mean, they're only a year or two into it. If you're got a long-term, if you're a
Representative
long-term
Lakis.
employee, you're going to stick with what you.
Unfortunately, Mr. Carlin isn't here, but I think he
One
would
second, Diana. I just
testify.
I want to hear.
That's okay. Just on the funding thing, so if you're concerned about people that are currently retired, what should have happened is that enough money was put in to fully fund right now all the future expenses of their retirement. That wasn't done. And that's being fixed by the mechanism for dealing with the unfunded liability. So right now for the retired people, the money that comes in to help with their retirement above and beyond what they initially and their employer put in, and then the amount that grew from investment, are the UAL payments that all the employers are making. This bill says that even if a new employee goes to Group 3 or an existing employee chooses to go to Group 3, their employer is still on the hook for making exactly the same payments to the past debt, to the UAL. So that money is still going to come in to help fund the retirement of current retirees.
I think that if I'm understanding correctly, or maybe I'm just reading myself into this, the concern would be how much money are the new hires typically putting in on a regular basis to help the cash flow. Marty had mentioned that 80% of what's getting paid out is what's immediately getting put in, so that we can leave the rest of the money in investments, right? We don't need to keep them liquid all of the time. Is this going to hurt liquidity so that we have to pull more money out of investments and drop the rate of return potentially?
I think my understanding what he said, and I mean, people could contact him and have him email some information on this, which I'd be glad to see, is, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but what I understood is that this is going to be a small enough effect that with the UAL money still coming in, it's the effect will be de minimis. It won't matter. I mean, right now, something close to 80% of what's being paid into the retirement system for current employees is the UAL, and that's still going to go in, even with this change.
And I don't know if you'd have any idea on this, Tony. The other thing that I was wondering, does the definition of pension shift here as far as the Windfall Act would be concerned? So because they're
Yes.
still paying into Social Security on top of what they're putting into the retirement system, right? So they're not gonna lose Social Security benefits like they would under the regular pension.
Well, that's not necessarily true. Yeah, so what happens, I mean, I'm in that situation. I get Social Security, and I also am living partly on money I'm pulling out of 401k and IRAs. You know, when you do your taxes, you report that income, unless it's a Roth, where you've already paid taxes, but I've got traditional. You will have part of your Social Security benefits taxed just based on your total income. But my understanding is that's the same whether that income is being pulled out of an IRA or you're getting it from a pension. So I don't think it's going to make a difference. And Carol, correct me, you may
Yeah,
know more.
the Windfall Act applies specifically to people who have a pension earned while they were not paying into Social Security, which in this case is Group 2.
Okay, so it
These
never
people-
applies to Group 1 anyway. Okay.
Right.
Just
No,
wanted-
they
I
get,
wanted to
the
clarify.
usual IRS penalties for earning too much, but there's nothing we can do about it.
Sure. Yeah, Peter.
So this was alluded to just a moment ago, but the tax return and tax filing aspect of it is something that we need to think through, because some people have a pretty simple estate or pretty simple holdings, and they may still be doing their own taxes, okay? But to what degree is this going to make tax filing a lot more complicated, so people are going to go like, I can't figure this out anymore. Now I'm going to have to pay an accountant. I'm not saying this is going to be different. I use an accountant because I got a kind of a complicated situation, but what are the answers here? So
The difference is that if you are receiving a traditional pension, which I am, you get a 1099-P that says your pension was so much this year and so much of it is taxable. If you get, this will give you a statement from your retirement, from the system saying you withdrew so much from the plan and it's all taxable. It's one line on the, you'll still, it should not be that much more difficult.
Right. I mean, if you're using, you could do it
That's
yourself. You're
easy.
going to enter it on a different line, or if you're using TurboTax or the H&R Block app, they ask the questions, you put it in, it goes on a different line in the form, but it's the number just is a different line, and that's all. The other thing is, from a tax standpoint, there is actually another advantage to doing it this way, and that is each year you have a choice as to how much money you're going to withdraw, as long as it's at least the minimum required distribution. And what that means is, let's say, 1 year you have some other income, maybe from an investment, or maybe you worked part-time or whatever. You can choose that year to take less out of your 401A or whatever this is. But if a pension, you're going to get the same amount of money every year. And that means, you may end up in a higher tax bracket. Whereas with this, you have a choice within, with a floor, but you have a choice as to how much you take out. You may be able to avoid paying additional taxes because 1 year you had more income for some reason.
I'm not objecting to it on that basis. I just think we need to think through it
Yeah.
and make the argument so people know up front. We want to be transparent, right?
Right.
So they know up front, this is what I'm going to get, this is what it's going to, these are additional complications, if any, and so forth, so that we have addressed that. So people are not going, well, is there any water in the pool before I jump off this diving board?
Yeah, I do my own taxes. I actually use TurboTax, but with the statement from the money you withdrawn from an IRA or 401k, it actually tells you, which things you need to enter, and it gives you some idea of where. So it's no more complicated one or the other. You have to,
Thank you.
Sure, Diane, one more.
I apologize for being late. I couldn't get the ice off my windshield. I came in as the presenter, the prime sponsor was talking about the healthcare costs under this plan. And that was a concern of mine also, that the original bill and the amendments that were presented originally say that the health care costs would be paid by these new employees at their own expense.
Which is exactly what happens with current employees from Group 1, state employees who are retired. They have to deal with there's a subsidy, but they have to contribute to it. And the wording in the amendment was taken exactly from the Group 1.
yeah. And we
Is there still a subsidy?
included it here because
There's no change.
if we didn't, then the Group 3 people wouldn't be able to do it. But we're letting them continue exactly the same thing they have now.
So it still has a subsidy?
Would
It-
that
Depends on what the legislature feels like doing.
But it refers, if you look at it, this is on the last page, 100A71. It refers back to two sections, or a number of sections in RSA 21I, which defines the plan they have now. So it just says they're eligible for the same plan under the same terms as, Group 1.
So does that mean that they would be getting the same subsidy, or?
Yes. That's what it says, unless otherwise provided.
But it would be dependent on what, I believe it's the Finance Fiscal Committee that
That's-
determines.
As are
The
current
amount.
retirees.
Okay, and is there a way that we can tell whether that subsidy would still be viable with this new plan?
It shouldn't make any difference.
Because my understanding, and Marty's actually testified this, and I think on another bill, the retirement, NHRS has nothing to do with that whole health insurance group thing, so it can't have any impact on it.
I realize that it's all determined by the fiscal committee, but it's dependent on the amount of money that's available.
but it's not available in the retirement system. It's, I assume,
No,
Right.
it's all set by the legislature and the budget,
Yeah, the budget,
by
right.
DAS and fiscal to finalize it, but it shouldn't make any difference what group they're in.
right, we just
They'll-
want to
they'll
make
either
sure it
fund
was,
Or they won't fund it.
we just wanted to make sure it was available to the people that were put into group 3 as well. So they weren't
Under-
losing
Yeah,
it.
I mean,
Under the same precarious conditions as Group
Yeah,
1.
yeah.
yeah,
I mean-
you'd have to come to the conclusion that some reason fiscal would continue to allow Group 1 to do it, but would exclude Group 3. from
I'm not
doing
even
it.
sure they could do that.
Oh, they can. I'm just saying what the rationale would be. You know, that's what we'd have to wrap our mind around. Why would they do that?
Right.
A
And-
more
But,
likely would be an across the board cut.
Yeah, I would assume so. Representative Tree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think I've got any questions on the pensions at all, but there might be a few people, and I'd like to ask questions to clear up for them, those poor people. Those poor
Thank you so
people.
much, Representative Tree. He
The
is.
commission will run the pension plan.
It's not a pension plan, but it's a defined contribution plan.
Right.
So you don't get a pension.
Right. So is there a cost for the commission?
I mean, there will be some costs, not only for whatever employees are in the commission. I mean, one thing is we're using the existing one, so we're not standing up another whole board and the cost for that.
Right.
But the costs, and there will be a cost for the commission. I assume there's going to be some employee portal, so there'd be some cost, IT cost to getting that set up. And then the other thing, the way I think the existing plan works, the 101B plan, is the plan in RSA 101B, is they generally will contract out with some outfit to actually handle the management of the funds and the investment and all that. I mean, like when I was working for a private company, I had a 401k, and the company contracted with Fidelity to handle the whole thing, and there's other vendors that will do that. So there will be costs when they contract that out to pay for that management of the investments, okay? And the way this is written is that after the first 3 years, the cost of that will be paid for by the fund. The problem is, two problems. One is until there's a reasonable amount of money in it, the percentage of what's in the fund that it would take to administer it would be high enough that the returns would be very poor. And second of all, we heard testimony from, I think the fellow who runs the current defined, yeah. He said that if there isn't a guarantee for payment for the management on the startup end until there's money in there, that nobody's going to bid on it. And so that is the reason for, paying the administrative cost for the first about 3 years.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I've only got 27.
Oh, only 27?
Yeah.
we may have to
Yeah.
cut a few of them
I
short.
thought the first speaker said that they would have to hire somebody,
Right.
but that would be
There
like
would be-
hiring Fidelity.
Well, no, it'll be both. I mean, you're going to have some employees working for the state to oversee it. I mean, if you're going to contract something, somebody's got to write the RFP and somebody's got to oversee the contract. And then there will be some work in the state because there'll be at least some employee portal probably the state will have. Maybe that'll all be contracted out. I don't know. But there will be some work that the state will do. And maybe most of it will be done by the contractor. But where that's split is up to, how they write the contract.
Yes, and also you'll have somebody who needs to write the rules
Yep.
and answer questions. So that's something that you would probably want to have an employee available to do that. It might be that the administrator of the 457 plan gets an assistant or a rule writer or something like that to start up, but there will be some overhead in the
Right. We're not expecting that to be large. And it's like, again, I work for a company and the HR department, the benefits people, handled some stuff around the 401k plan. I mean, they did training, provided training materials to the employees. There were people who could ask if you had problems, somebody to contact. But the bulk of what we did, like setting how we want to do investments and all that, I mean, actually we could go to a company portal, but all that did was send us off to Fidelity. So there is a small part was in the company, but most of it was Fidelity. I expect similar situation here.
And you are tying that to the 457, correct? That's what Dan said.
Yeah,
So
it's the
all
same
the same
board.
it's all the same program. Just for clarification, so the money that we're putting in initially, which he said could be over the next few years, upwards of 20 million or so. Is
No,
that
no,
correct?
no. What he was saying there was that
Oh, just that it would.
that within a few years he expected the fund contributions to the fund would be about around 20 million.
Okay, gotcha.
And the idea is in that amount of time, the fund will have enough money that it can pay the expenses and still have the employees get a reasonable return on their investment. And as it grows, presumably the percentage of the administrative costs as a percentage of the whole fund, as the fund grows, would actually go down.
Okay. Yeah, Chris.
Thank you. So as long as a new employee is under the 401 whatever plan, the employer, and the employer, the state, will be paying into the UAL.
Correct.
But if that person leaves, they're not paying for that ghost person.
Well, that's true today. If you have somebody who's in the pension system and they leave, I mean, the UAL is paid on, as I understand it, a percentage of gross payroll. And if that goes down because an employee is not getting paid because they left, then the obligation towards the UAL will go down.
I'll forego my other 47 questions.
We can talk more about it,
I'll be eternally grateful.
So the employee is paying 7% in. Does the employer pay in?
Yes,
2.48% right now.
2.48%.
Yeah,
correct.
2.48,
Right.
yeah.
Plus the UAL.
Plus the 10.79%
Yes.
for the
I mean,
UAL.
what-
The UAAL goes into the New Hampshire retirement system, and it's managed along with the rest of the payments for the retirees and the people who are in the existing plans.
Yeah.
The 2.5% goes into this plan to be and is managed by the employee and is vested immediately.
And it-
And we put in that that's the minimum, so that people could negotiate for a higher match or whatever. We think that the current amount is barely adequate, and so we would want to have people we would like to have people save on their own on the deferred compensation plan, and we'd like to encourage the employer to contribute more. But as a start, we're putting in the same amount into each plan.
Right. Yeah, we changed actually in this most recent draft that they have to contribute equal to or greater than the amount they're currently contributing to that they do for any Group 1 employee. The normal cost, right?
All right. Well, thank you, Representative Leakis. I think just due to time and how it's going, I would like to give a little bit of time just to hear from the State Employees Association and their take on this.
All right, thank you.
Probably not a ton of time, but a little bit of time.
While he's setting up, who's going to take care of the amendment that's going to be needed to clean up some of the things that Dan talked about?
I'm assuming Tony will work on it with Dan.
Okay. Just want to make sure somebody's on it.
Good morning. Thank you very much. With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I believe I have some, I was only anticipating 5. I see 6.
Not everybody's on the subcommittee.
I can certainly provide more. So for the record, Bob Blaisdell, representing the State Employees Association. Good morning. First, I'd like to start off with an apology. When this bill was initially heard, public hearing, I had a family emergency and was not able to attend. So I apologize for that, but I certainly very much appreciate the opportunity this morning. I guess first and foremost, this is in your packet, you're going to see a letter from the state employees president, Mr. Rich Gullah, outlining many of the concerns we have with this piece of legislation. So far, I believe we've seen the as introduced version. We've seen the amendment presented at the public hearing. We've seen another amendment this morning. And on the fly this morning, we're seeing additional edits. So we're essentially on to like the fourth version of this, which should hopefully bring you to a pause. This is a very serious matter. You're dealing with the financial futures of thousands of individuals who work very, very hard for this state, our state. So I guess first question would be out of the box is who's asking for this? I can tell you as representing the State Employees Association, we certainly are not. You'll see in your packet this blue, one of these blue, and again, I apologize. Somebody put a trick on me this morning, put blue paper into the printer. I apologize for the obnoxious color, but you'll see here with Florida, North Dakota, South Dakota, South Carolina, excuse me, and Colorado, when employees are given a choice of the matter between a defined benefit and a defined contribution plan, it's overwhelming. 76% in Florida chose defined benefit. North Dakota, 98%. South Carolina, 82%. Colorado, 88%. We just don't necessarily see where this is coming from. When you look at the legislative history, which is also stapled to President Gullah's testimony or letter, you'll see the legislative history going all the way back to the year 2000. I've included all of the blurbs from all of those inexpedient to legislate motions that were adopted by both Republican and Democrat legislatures. It's certainly been the course of this legislature over the years to review everything to see if there's something that we can do better. Again, I hope we can all pause here because everywhere we go in this legislature, in these halls, this legislative session, all we hear is recruitment, retention, recruitment, retention. That's where we're at. This is not a bill that emphasizes retention. In fact, I've heard many people say, this is portable, encouraging the portability of this. But I do want to make one clear note here. It's been suggested that the current plan that we have is not portable. I would suggest to you this morning that it is portable. It's portable within the first 10 years. And legislatures in the past very wisely set up this system to protect the taxpayer dollars. What does that mean? That means that taxpayer dollars are going in for the first 10 years along with the employee contributions. And if that employee so chooses to leave before they're vested, that employee, it's portable. They can leave with their money, but not the taxpayer's money. Okay? When they invest in this state, they're rewarded by working hard for the state, and they become vested. Now, then once they're vested, now the taxpayers say, thank you, here's your pension. So right now, the system we have protects the taxpayer money, right? And it is portable, but that employee just takes their chunk of the money that they invested over the 9.5 years. So I wanted to make sure that was clear. You've got a lot of material there. You've got the week off next week. Some of you, hopefully, you'll be able to have a chance to review it. I want to make sure that we understand the guesswork potentially by these potential Group 3 employees about having to make the right choices for their financial future. I consider myself halfway educated, fairly intelligent. I know I get my informational packets from Merrill Lynch every now and again, and I can't make heads or tails of it. I don't consider myself to be in a position to be making decisions to make. That's what I ask the experts for, right? I ask for those people to guide me through that. The issue with the defined contribution plan is there's no guarantee, right? When you look at the stock market, which is all this is based on, right? The 4 worst years in the stock market's history, okay? Out of the 10 worst years, out of the 10 worst years ever in the history of the stock market, 4 of them happened in this century. 4 of them in the last 22 years. So if you happen to be one of those unfortunate individuals to sometimes have to retire or choose to retire in those down years when your investment just plummets, okay, and you have a 401k, there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to have access to those funds in its completion for the rest of your life. You may cannibalize that in the first 8 years of your retirement, and then what? Cost shifting is a very real issue, which I have not heard yet debated. Okay. In the future, let's say push this out 30, 40 years and we have a group 3 and these people retire and they outlive the investments of their defined contribution. Where do they go? I'll tell you where they go. They go back onto the rolls of the state because that's what happens. That's what happens. So the cost shifting right there, I hope everybody, again, please pause and think about that, about what that does to not only the individual, putting them in that situation, but also the taxpayers of the state. It's concerning. Whereas obviously a defined benefit, you have that for the rest of your life until the day you die, and you can count on it. I wasn't able to attend the hearing, but I was able to listen to it online. And a good friend of mine, good friend of most of ours here is
Just really quickly, maybe like 3 more minutes or so.
Oh, 3 minutes. Okay.
Three to
I'm on-
5 tops. Yeah.
I'm on the clock.
Yeah. I'm just
Okay.
watching the clock a little bit.
All right. Okay. There was a comment made by Representative McGuire earlier this morning about should this legislature decide to move forward with the group 3 that there's nothing. I believe Madam Chair mentioned that their retirement can't be screwed with. I would take issue with that comment only because I know that this state is the only state in the country, I believe, I stand corrected, but I believe is the only state in the country that actually put forward retroactive changes to the New Hampshire retirement system. So I would suggest to you that, yeah, although they will have their money like 100% vested right away, however, that's not to say that 10, 15 years from now, we're sitting at this very table and we're talking about a hybrid, maybe a hybrid, but half defined benefit, half contribution plan. So what we've witnessed is that we know that the legislature can make changes. So nothing's certainly set in stone.
Just for clarification on that point, if
Yes.
those members had been vested, they wouldn't have been able to have been retroactively affected. So the vestment was the point of contention in the courts, just for clarification on that.
Correct. But what we witnessed was that there can be changes made.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So I know I'm on the clock here.
I'll allow people to ask questions as well, just as far as the overall testimony.
Yeah, so I would just ask to, please, obviously you're going to do your due diligence and be very thoughtful about this. I guess I'll just open it up to any questions now, and I appreciate your time this morning.
Yeah, Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Bob, thank you very much for being here today because we certainly want to hear from all sides, all rational sides anyway. So the legislative history that is appended to the letter from Mr. Gulla, I was one of the people who got the letter, so I did see some of that and was able to kind of think through it and look through it. But is it not the case that this proposed plan is quite different from the previous plans, as I understand it anyway, in that many of the previous ideas or concepts that were ITL'd, all of them, were some form of, here's what you got now, we're going to switch that to something completely, well, not completely different, but fundamentally different from, one was defined benefit, one was going to go to defined contribution. Whereas this, as I understand it, and please tell me if I've got it wrong or if you see it differently, that we are in this plan, or the sponsors, not we haven't done it yet, are saying, here's your current plan, that's going to stay. And all the commitments have been made. So UAL is still going to be continued to be funded by the employers. And the people are still going to have their defined benefit and so forth. And group 3 is going to be something added on. Is that not the case, or is that your understanding?
Well,
As
if I-
opposed to
if I under-
the earlier plans that were all ITL.
Yeah, if I understand your question, Representative, is basically what's the difference from the past into what we have in front of us today. The differences being, I know in the past there were very, very good fiscal notes associated with the bills in the past. I do see an FN associated with this bill number. However, I stand corrected. I haven't seen what it's going to cost the state in terms of the first couple of years of implementing this plan. I haven't seen the additional cost of the UAL by picking up the cost of the Group 3 people. So that's a difference, I guess, in a question of not knowing what the finances are. And I understand this isn't going to finance. So again, I create hopefully some great pause there. As far as the Group 3, if I understand your question, and please tell me if I'm going down the wrong rabbit hole here, Representative, but the difference being this time around, it does not include firefighters, police, teachers, as all the versions in the past have. That's my understanding, and again, stand corrected. But the legislative history that I'm aware of, this is the first time this is just targeted towards state employees.
As far as I remember, that is correct. It is, it's definitely the first time that it is limited to state employees, Group 1, because the characteristics of Group 1 and Group 2 are significantly different. So this says, a defined benefit pension makes a lot more sense for Group 2, who are essentially committing to public service their entire careers, than to the state employees who are not necessarily so.
I would, with all due respect, Madam Chair, there are many members, thousands of members, that view the state of New Hampshire working for them in Group 1 state employees as their career, and they're very proud of
I
that.
wasn't saying that there were not career employees. I'm saying that not all Group 1 are career employees. Even if you
Sure.
have a career, say, as a civil engineer, you might work for the state and then go work for Audley or whatever.
Sure. I also understand, I know several people who are former teachers, former firefighters, former police officers that after a couple of first years on the job, they decide, you know what, I'm going to go be a real estate agent. I'm going to go sell insurance. To try and say that all Group 2 employees or teachers, that's their career and that's their set, no, I would say no, that's not the case.
Overwhelmingly so, though. Teachers less so, but teachers are in a different situation in that there are so many employers compared to the state.
Any other questions? Thank you for joining us.
I really
Appreciate
appreciate
you.
your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Enjoy your break.
Representative Leakes, just really quickly, one more thing.
Yes?
So in the creation of this, it's mandatory for all future members to be a part of the defined contribution plan. Was the concern over the pool of money being large enough and therefore needing all of those employees, or is there a reason why we didn't offer the option to stay in the defined benefit as opposed to, or
That's
choose?
the biggest reason. The problem is, if something is optional, I mean, even if people in general like it, it may take time for people to decide this is something they want, news to get out, whatever. And the problem is, if that fund grows too slowly, then, either the state would have to pay for administration, or at least part of it, longer, or the administrative costs would consume too high a percentage of the employees' contributions, with them resulting in them having a very poor return or worse.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I just wanted clarification.
Yeah.
Any other questions, guys, for Tony? Thank you, Representative.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Yeah, when I see that information, I think I and the prime sponsor may get together and
Yeah,
come up with a response.
obviously,
to
we're
it.
not squaring the circle today. So, yeah, we need the finalized amendment version from you anyway. So we'll be meeting again on this one for sure.
Thank you.
I've got, as it turns out, an extra copy of the letter from Mr. Gullah. It has some, the ITO and previous bill that they offended, I believe. All right, thank you.
Anybody on the committee opposed to us moving off of 559 for now? We'll have to come back to it.
I would
Yeah.
just like to make one comment addressing something that was stated at the hearing. It was put forward that the individual had doubts about the constitutionality of the current pension program based on Section 36, which was instituted in 1784. I would say that folks back then really did not understand pension programs, and it was certainly a different animal than what we see today. And I would point out further that the state constitutional convention, which was comprised of 400 members in 1984, 200 years later, chose to amend that section with 36A to protect the pension funds. So I think if they had doubts about the constitutionality of the plan at that time, that answers the question that it is in fact constitutional. Thank you.
I'm not sure we were planning on ripping the whole thing out by the roots anyway, but all right. I would like to move on to 461. Representative Pearson, if you would like to join us.
This being a work session, we needed to discuss modifications. There was some suggestions made during the public hearing. And for the record, Representative C. Pearson, Rockingham District 13, Derry. The original thought process of this really surrounded Group 2, and as discussions were had during the public hearing about Group 1's inclusion in this as well. And then there was substantial discussion about handcuffing the downsizing of specifically school districts and their employees, and how this may potentially inhibit that. So between the public hearing and some hallway discussions in reference to really where the abuses are versus it not being a global problem within those systems, it's generally just based on some of the top tier positions. There was some discussion as to modifying this in order to just cover those type positions.
Yeah, my concern initially with it was that it's perhaps two different issues. And would you consider focusing primarily on the downshifting from a full-time position to a part-time position for now? one of the concerns I have is that there's a pretty easy workaround for reducing the number of employees, especially in the situation we find ourselves in right now, which is that a municipality could just leave that position on the books and not fill it and say, well, we still have it, but it's not filled. And to me, that would seem like it'd be a pretty easy workaround to reduce, if you reduce the number of employees, now they're on the hook for the liability. Well, only if they get rid of the position, but what if they don't fill the position? Keep it on the books, but don't fill it.
Gotcha. So I suppose that would be a similar workaround to them. Well, I guess it wouldn't. No, not in that case. So this is, you're looking, what I'm getting at from your Representative Simon is more along the lines of a reclassification from full to part rather than elimination.
Yeah.
So I got you there. Okay.
I mean, I just think it's more workable
Sure.
that way.
And that's really what's going on anyway. So with that being said, we did discuss that this would be, or there was discussions in reference to top tier positions versus all positions. And I think that in this particular case, it would be prudent perhaps to address the areas we know where there's a problem. And if we have a more global problem later, we can certainly come back and make modifications. But
Hang on one second there, Steve. Any comments from the committee? Yeah,
Yes,
Representative
I
McGuire.
was in on the hallway discussions, and I agree that the abuses that this bill is intended to address are the top tier positions. There's not a problem if Epsom decides it doesn't need a full-time emergency coordinator. I mean, we're still going to have as many police or fire as before. We're just not going to have that position be full-time. The trouble is with the police chiefs, the administrators, school administrators, possibly fire captains, though that I haven't heard of any cases.
Nope.
It's so, and in those cases, the abuse is that they take an existing full-time position and declare it to be part-time and hire a retiree to fill it, so that the employer doesn't have to pay into the retirement system at all if they're hiring a part-time person, and they can offer a somewhat lower salary because it's part-time and the person is already collecting their pension. Is that the problem you're seeking to?
yeah, I mean that and the fact that the municipality then, with there being no contribution into the retirement system, they get out of not only the payment, the normal portion of that, but also the UAL portion. So if we're looking at those types of positions, we're talking superintendents, principals, administrators, fire chiefs, police chiefs. I did write down the word director. I don't know how that title fits into something, but and then sub variations of that as in assistants and deputies, with the exception of law enforcement, because the sheriff's department calls their rank and file deputies, and that's, again, we're not looking at rank and file here. So what I'm trying to get from the committee here is exactly how the framework, how to frame this amendment, and that's really the discussion that we need to have here as far as the titles of folks that would be included in this top tier type look.
You could also put a salary limit, the top 10% of salaries in the department.
That may become problematic in the sense that there are police departments where the top 10% of salaries will not include their police chief
Really?
for the salary. They don't have any overtime.
Well, I meant salary, not pay.
So, okay.
Base
I got you.
Base pay? Maybe base pay.
We had a situation in Dover where there was one police officer who was working every detail he could get because he had a bunch of kids. So he was working everything. So he had a very high net pay, but or gross pay, I guess. But it was not salary or base pay. So that difference has to be spelled out.
Yeah, I mean, that happens everywhere.
Everywhere.
Sure.
Nothing unusual about it.
So, okay. So then, I'm just trying to, I have to think of this I have to think of Fitzwilliam versus Manchester and something with the word notch in it versus Nashua, right? Because this is a global law. So it's got a tiny little town versus our larger communities, and how does this work?
If I can just get a sense from the committee, though, if we are just going to keep this to top tier employees and we're really just trying to deal with the issue of them moving from full-time to part-time in order to circumvent the New Hampshire retirement system, is that something for the most part the committee would be interested in hearing back on? Is that better than the original?
It's a real problem, and it's an abuse of the system, and I think if we can figure out a way to get at it,
Yeah.
we ought to do it.
So,
Yeah, so I mean, I don't, Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. It is a problem. It also creates a very bad image for the people that hear about it, and it's an incentive for other towns to do the same thing. I have it on a totally separate issue. The penalty you have here is in perpetuity, and I think
No.
well, the retirement system assumed it was. So I
That-
think
well,
we
the-
need to be explicit. I would suggest something like for 10 years or until the full-time position is restored.
it says that in
whichever.
line 7. If the position is restored to a group 2
Yeah, it
contributing
does.
position, the penalty shall be terminated and the normal calculations for retirement system contributions will be restored. We want to incentivize them
Thank you very much. I missed that.
to do it, to do things right. So we certainly don't want to lock them into a problem.
So unless there's anything else from the committee on this, and it's fine if there is, yes.
I know we did talk about the look back, retroactive, if you will. I assume that.
Yeah, line
sentence-
10 can go away.
That can be gone.
Representative True.
Just trying to clear up the fog that's always surrounded me.
That's right.
So we're talking about people, a few people,
Yes, just
I
a few
mean,
people.
a few
You always
people,
say a fog, but you're always right on the stick, Representative.
a few people who were eligible to retire,
Yes,
did so. Nothing illegal there.
correct.
And because they retire, they're not paying into the retirement system anymore. And if the town wants to hire them back as part-time,
But pay them the same kind of salary potentially. But just call it part-time work so they don't have to pay into the system.
Right now, if you retire and then go back to work for a participating employer, which is everybody, at every government unit in the state, your pension is suspended and you make further contributions into the retirement system. If you're lucky, you might get a raise and your pension, or more years of service and your pension might increase. If you decide to retire and collect your pension, you can work part-time, but only for a limited number of hours, which is actually incredibly generous, but we won't go into that.
That's a different bill.
That's
So-
a different issue. But if you are working part-time, neither you nor your employer pays into the retirement system for you for that position.
So you're double dipping. You're keeping your job and you're collecting your pension at
Right.
the same time.
And the issue is that if you're unscrupulous, you can declare yourself working part-time and with your employer's consent, and they'll pay you some amount part-time and you'll still collect your pension.
and I realize double dipping is a nasty, well, it's not popular to the people who are paying taxes for that school administrator or for the town manager or whatever. But isn't that the town's choice? I mean,
Well, you left off one part. The town is also getting out of its debt that it is required to pay, and
Yeah.
that's where that's a bigger issue with this than probably anything else.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't be such a problem if the UAAL didn't exist, but because it does, they're taking that job off of the payroll, let's say, for downshifting the debt. So that's going to get pushed off to other communities to pick up that burden. because the debt doesn't go away. They're just not paying their portion of it now for the position that they should be paying. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
that'd be the biggest problem. I think in 2040, this isn't necessarily as big of a deal.
In 2040, 100A is going to probably be substantially rewritten anyway. So we'll cross that bridge when all of us are talking to other legislators about it.
Yeah. And also, I mean, if it is a concern, would there be a problem with putting a sunset clause in once the UIAL is fully funded?
If you want, I'm not
Well,
opposed to that.
The thing of it is that we're asking them to pay, yeah, we're just saying employer contribution. And I would feel better if you just said it's a UAAL contribution, because the person is not earning any further benefits as a part-time employee, so the normal cost is not necessary. But
Sure.
that's a tiny amount of the,
Right. Normal cost of the pension system is extremely low. I mean, that's why we created the pension system in '67, because it's far cheaper than doing it any other way. So sure. I mean, that's really the UAL part of this is really the majority of
Right.
the problem here.
You just don't want to shift costs
right.
to other
and
communities.
that's the thing, right? It's not fair for Derry. I mean, Representative True and I border towns. It's not fair if my town decides to come up with this scheme. All I'm doing is shifting that debt over to his town and everybody else's town, and that's just not. This has got a little bitty fire going on right now under it, and if we've spent 6 years quietly talking about fixing this, and then it happened again. So we have got to nip this in the bud before this becomes a tactic.
Any other questions? Yeah.
It may have already become a tactic. It just is not very widespread yet.
Right.
So keep it on the down low so they don't hear us talking. No.
Okay. So yeah. I
right.
assure you, this is something that within, especially the Group 2 world, everyone is well aware of.
Yeah. So if you want Representative to work on an amendment, and we are happy to help with input on that.
Well, that's why I'm talking to you now in this forum, really, just so that, because like I said, my thought with this is that if we're going to look at the positions where this has happened or potentially could happen, then we're talking about superintendents, principals, administrators, fire chief, police chief, and potentially the title of director.
And the like.
Yeah.
Any director, you name what it's called.
Sure.
If it's the same kind of thing.
So if we did use the phrase "and the like," because I'm not really familiar with seeing that in statute very
Oh,
much, is
OLS might have a different term.
that
for it.
becomes a right.
OLS to figure it out.
There's a legal term. Yeah. However, the lawyers will phrase such a thing.
And then everybody can show up and say it's too vague to enforce.
Well, you'd have litigation.
Yeah.
Would the term administrative position have any?
Senior administrator.
Okay.
I mean, you're talking senior personnel.
Yes.
Well, the other thing that you don't want to leave as a loophole is whatever the organization is just changes the name so it doesn't match up with the statute, and then they're like, well, it isn't a fire chief, it's a whatever, and
Right.
yeah,
It's a fire leader.
exactly.
Sure. Of course. All right. And that everybody laughs at that until the first community does it.
No, they'll do it for sure.
and then right. That's what City of Franklin did. That they were the first ones to ever kind of get down this road, and that's exactly what they did. They had an emergency management or an emergency operations director, or some bizarre title that was not fire chief and not police chief. So in statute it only says this and this.
Yeah.
So I agree. We'll ask for that. The legalese of that concept, sure. Sure. Okay. Well then,
And we'll have another work session. You can bring it back to it,
Yeah.
and we'll take a look at it.
yep, that works. And now that we've got a framework here, we'll go from there. Sure.
Cool.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I'll
Steve.
run that by you before I file it.
Okay,
so
that
we
sounds
can-
good.
We can just discuss
Yeah,
it.
we'll discuss it. I'll pass it around, get some feedback from
Sure.
everybody else, and then we can send it in.
Okay. Sounds
That way
good.
you're not showing up, and then we're totally revamping it and having to have a third work session.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Gotcha. All right. Fantastic.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody all set on this bill? Any other? All right. Representative Bernardi, thank you so much for being so patient and listening to all of our fascinating conversation. I'm going to move to 457 and welcome Representative Bernardi, who has some further information to share with us.
So for the record, Representative J.D. Bernardi, Rockingham 36, which is Hampton Falls, Kensington, Southampton, Newton, and Plastow. And what I've provided you is an article about our Attorney General joining a lawsuit recently, exactly focused on the topic of this the principle of this legislation, which is that ESG investing, and it could be any kind of investing that is not standard, using standard fiduciary duty, pecuniary responsibility only, not some other factor, social justice, whatever it is inappropriate. And as the federal government has changed the laws, or is in the process of changing the laws to permit this, and we have multiple states that are now suing the federal government to stop the implementation of that rule. And the rationale is highlighted in yellow at the bottom. ESG funds generally gain a 6.3% return compared to an 8.9% return for the average market. So there are multiple surveys that are out there, and in the testimony that happened on the bill when it was heard, you heard people make the claims that yes, it can be this and it can be that, and you can look at whatever survey you want, but in general, I believe it is accepted that in the current climate, any of these ESG funds or non-straight fiduciary duty-oriented funds will have a lower rate of return. The CEO of BlackRock made the statement that we need to do this for about 10 years or so in order to change the way the world works, and then this won't be a problem anymore. So just accept it. So that's that's the principle behind the legislation. The second article in the stack just describes what the court case is, and the other two documents I provided you were the documents I referenced in my testimony. And unfortunately, I did not have the ability to give you at that time. So with that, I'm ready to entertain whatever questions you may have.
Any questions from the committee? Yes, Representative McGuire.
Good morning. I see that our Attorney General has said that that the fiduciaries should place their client's interest at the forefront, which is New Hampshire law and New Hampshire Constitution. And the issue you're trying to stop is a federal law. And I don't see how a state law can block a federal law.
So when I reviewed the law with OLS, the treasurer does not have a fiduciary duty to make investments according to a traditional fiduciary duty responsibility. There's nothing in those statutes that requires that. The pension laws say that one should use sole interest, which I can argue, and I think many would argue, is even higher standard than traditional fiduciary duty. The question that I have is whether or not that is indeed being done. And so the purpose of this was to drive home that point that one should be looking at that. And I asked in my testimony that the pension funds be asked whether or not they are actually using the sole interest law or fiduciary duty responsibility in their investment activities, or are they turning it over to many pension funds are run by turning the actual voting of shares and buying and processing of those shares over to a proxy that doesn't look at these things. So if it's listed on the exchange, it's okay. You know, if they are not looking at the underlying criteria, like whether they're pursuing ESG or some other factors beyond straight fiduciary duty, which is why you have 25 states that are now stirring the pot here, saying this is wrong.
To follow up on that question, though, and you know I share your feelings on ESG as a general rule for sure. I'm just trying to parse out, you know, what's going on in this particular bill. Is your main concern simply that the state of New Hampshire is making investments with fiduciary responsibility in the forefront, or is the main concern that we just aren't investing in ESG at all? The reason why I ask the question is, what if the two coincide in a particular fund, whereas they both are take ESG into consideration, but it is also producing the highest return that's available to the state of New Hampshire? And just following up on that, my question would be, would it meet your goal to just put into statute that the treasurer does have to take fiduciary responsibility into consideration when making investments, and leave the ESG component of it out, from your perspective?
Well, I don't. The law itself does not say anything about ESG. The proposal, it just says. Let me find it here. All
Social,
investments.
Social,
Investments,
political,
right.
or ideological interests. I mean, that's the part that I'm getting at. It doesn't say ESG, but that's the general idea of it.
The
political idea.
analysis section
Yeah.
says that, but the proposal, that's in order to make it clear what this focus is. But the law actually being proposed is all investments and their management shall be governed by fiduciary duty to maximize benefits to the state and the beneficiaries of states' trust funds. That's it. So it doesn't matter if it's ESG or if it's some other criteria. The bottom line is whoever is managing the fund should manage them for maximum return, period.
Right.
No other common or no other criteria should be blended into that.
Right. No, I understand. So that's my question is, if we were to make an amendment to this bill that basically just said that the Treasury, because the New Hampshire retirement system, from our understanding, is already under that obligation. The concern is that the Treasury isn't under that obligation. If we just rewrote it to say that the Treasury is under that obligation, would that meet your concerns?
It would meet my concern. However, I would ask that I am not sure that the treasurer the pension fund system is following that responsibility. The sole interest.
So
Responsibility.
maybe Carol would know this better than me. I'm sure she would actually know this better than me. Who oversees whether or not the New Hampshire retirement system is meeting that fiduciary responsibility, and who can hold them accountable? Because the same question would hold true to the treasurer if we pass this on to the treasurer.
I don't know the board. The board of trustees of the retirement system it's stated that they shall act. They are fiduciaries, and any person who is a beneficiary that thinks they are not investing solely for the benefit of the beneficiaries can sue them. I don't believe there is any specific entity that is checking up on them regularly. If that's what you're asking.
Yeah, well,
But there might, I don't know at all.
we got, even if we put that clause in, say we were to say that they had to ask whether or not they were taking those other things into consideration, the question still comes back to accountability. Who's holding them accountable to that? Who's looking after them to say, did you ask? Or where's the paperwork that you asked? Or that would be the next question.
That's the premise of why I brought this.
Right, but even if we were to pass this as
Yeah.
written,
Yeah.
who's holding them accountable? So now they're supposed to do this, but who's coming on the backside and holding them accountable for it? How would we know?
I would say basically the legislature. We had quite a bit of concern a few years back when the retirement system's earnings came in at, I believe it was 1.5% when everyone else was earning 12. And at that point, the legislature passed a bill that they had to post on the website the amounts that they were spending in investment, who they were spending money with to invest the monies, which corporations and how much. I would also point out that the investments for the retirement system are actually done by an independent investment committee appointed by the Board of Trustees.
Correct.
Right.
I would
They also have the fiduciary duty.
Yes, definitely. They are all fiduciaries and have that responsibility. I would also point out that the state treasurer is answerable to the legislature. It gets reelected every 2 years.
But there isn't like a standing committee on finance or anything that specifically oversees investments and would for the treasurer or for the New Hampshire retirement system. There's no standing committee that oversees that. Carol?
LEDNA does look at the retirement system fairly often, but we don't necessarily dig down into whether or not they're making changes.
So potentially that could be an amendment that would say there shall be a committee that investigates whether this fiduciary standard is being upheld.
Yeah, I'm just trying to drill down to make
Yeah,
sure
no,
that
I
I'm
understand.
I'm meeting your concerns with the bill, which is primarily that fiduciary responsibility
I
is
mean,
the
the-
paramount concern, and that somebody's watching to make sure that the institutions that are investing
Appropriately.
with that in mind.
Yes.
The retirement system does issue, their minutes are public. They do issue reports, and they send it to me ex officio. And I noticed that, for example, when the federal government said, don't invest in Russia, they had a plan to divest Russian assets, which they identified as being very risky and not a lot, but not a large part of their portfolio.
I understand. It's I believe I also looked at the site, and they're publishing their returns. Because yes, 10 or so years ago we were down to 1.5%, and then while everybody else is making over 10% in their returns, so the focus is on their rate of return, but there is no focus on whether or not this infiltration idea that you can invest both for fiduciary or pecuniary return and social justice concerns at the same time, which will drag your returns down somewhat, but maybe not so bad that you wouldn't notice it. That who's watching for that? That's the concern we're looking at here.
Those who care are watching. I mean, that's legitimately, if you think that they're investing in a way that jeopardizes their returns, you're an interested party, you're bringing in a bill. I mean, if you, and to be honest, looking at the returns of the retirement system, I'd say they are not worse than other retirement systems, but they sure look a whole lot more, more highly variable.
Volatile.
They're definitely more volatile.
Another thought potentially should some oversight, either finance or eDNA, should we request reports comparing the returns of our system to similar systems around the country?
They give them us.
We do get them? Okay, yeah.
I'll show you the stack of reports on my desk.
Okay.
They send it to me quarterly.
Okay. And do we know if the Treasury does the same thing?
It would go to finance rather than to eDNA.
Would
But
you
to be honest, I'll tell you that I get the report and they send out quarterly, and I look at it and I skim it for, obvious issues. And then I put it on the stack, and then when the stack gets too high, I take out the bottom.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but I'm not as concerned about these issues as you obviously are.
And speaking from the other side of eDNA, I would say we aren't either. It's a matter of how much they're making, not so much how they're making it, what kind of decisions they're making as far as maximizing the income.
Well,
Dealing with the gnomes of Zurich, I'm happy with that. Provided, of course, they get a reasonable return.
well, again, the concept is clear that if you are trying to serve two masters, your returns are going to be slightly lower. That's the issue.
Well, I feel like if the treasurer isn't under a fiduciary obligation in statute, we should look to fix that. I mean, I would say that's
I
something
would say that is something that we ought to include, that the treasurer does have a fiduciary responsibility, because she's got millions of dollars of state money.
Rainy day fund plus
Mhm.
all the
Rainy day
operating
fund, all
funds.
the lost money, all the in and outs.
Yeah.
She definitely needs to be a fiduciary responsibility, because some of that stuff sticks around for a while.
I would say that before we take that step, though, we should have the treasurer or a representative come in and address this issue directly with this subcommittee, because there may be conditions that we're not considering or hearing.
Yeah, I think bringing the treasurer in and maybe somebody from OLS who can explain that side of it as well.
Someone from the treasurer's office, I would say.
Yeah, I just meant someone from the lawyer side as well to interpret the statute and what is obligated or not.
I think you should just tell the treasurer, considering this bill, would they be able to have somebody meet with the subcommittee?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't look like, because when you read it, they're talking about costs to check into whether or not their current suppliers are compliant. They're not saying we don't have a fiduciary. I don't think that they're saying they don't feel they have a fiduciary responsibility.
Yeah.
So, but we definitely ought to talk to them.
all of the parameters that they feel are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll take care of that. I'll contact the treasurer and see if they can have a representative meet with us to discuss whether or not,
Mm-hmm.
and then if need be, we can check in with OLS and see if their interpretation is the same, so we can get multiple opinions on it, and then we can discuss it further and see what we do have the concern. We do want to make sure that all of our institutions are taking fiduciary responsibility as the primary concern for our investments. I think we're all agreed on that. So this we'll do that. We'll have another meeting. Looks like we are going to have another meeting on all three of these bills, and hopefully we can chip away at them a little bit more than we have until the 16th, 8th.
The exec is scheduled for the 8th.
8th. Okay, so
We do have till the 15th to actually complete all of the bills, but they're scheduled for the 8th. I have spoken with Representative Smith, and we can use, this room is available to us for Mondays as well as Fridays, seeing as how we're losing they're only going to be here on Tuesdays.
Okay.
We're losing our Thursdays to sessions, so Mondays and Fridays are available.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, Chris wouldn't miss it for the world. So, any other comments from the committee that we should take into consideration as we push forward with this? Yes, Representative Tree.
So are we expecting an amendment? Are we still talking?
I would say we should talk to the treasurer first.
Yeah, I mean, if the treasurer says, well, of course I have a fiduciary responsibility, but it's not in statute, then, I'm, regardless of this issue, I think just simply saying that the treasurer does have a fiduciary responsibility.
I'm sure that just has to be the case.
Well, I'm sure it's assumed, but I don't know where it is in statute.
But I-
10 years vested has been assumed for 60 years as well, and that's not in statute. So,
So at the very least, I would say everybody on the committee would support clarifying that the treasurer does have a fiduciary duty, provided there's no zingers that we don't know about, or there may be something somewhere else.
good. Representative Bernardi, thank you for your time, and
Thank you.
we'll keep you posted on as we continue to work on this thing. And unless anybody has anything else, that's the end of the subcommittee meeting.
So these were on the docket for our next meeting, but no longer.
They are on the docket for the exec session because all the bills are listed. We can recess and reschedule, and we probably will. Yes, yes, there are